Hi everyone, this is a short video explaining the Higher History SQA revision support. It's provided by Forth Valley and West Lothian Regional Improvement Collaborative, and it's March 2022 that this has been recorded. So the learning intentions for this video, basically, we'll be learning about the structure and approaches for answering the British, European and World paper and the Scottish paper in the Higher History exam. So the success criteria, you will be able to understand the structure of the Higher History exam, you'll understand the mark allocations for each type of question, understand the best approaches for tackling each type of question, and finally understand how to use your time effectively. So this is just a wee sort of overview of what the SQA updated guidance was, which came out in March 2022. So for Higher History, it was mostly just study guides, and these were sort of going over some of the key aspects of the course. This video will cover some of the information in this, but also give you some top tips and explain how to answer some of the questions. So in this lesson, you might see some of the following symbols. Here are the symbols, and I'll just explain what they mean. So listen, speak, repeat, read, write or copy down, correct your work, pause video to complete task, or watch. So the Higher History exam. Now the Higher History exam is actually split up into two papers. Paper 1 is the British, European and World paper, and they are essays, so you'll get 2 essays in this paper. The total marks for the paper is 44 marks, and each essay is worth 22 marks. Paper 2 is also known as the Scottish paper, and it's mostly sources, so there will be 3 source-based questions and 4 sources. You will also have an explain question, which is basically a knowledge question, and this paper is out of 36 marks. So the British, European and World History paper, it's on Friday the 20th of May 2022. The time in most schools will be 9 AM to 10:30 AM. Your time might be a little bit longer if you have additional support needs. Duration, it will last 1 hour and 30 minutes. Marks, there are 44 marks available. So the mark breakdown, you will answer 1 British essay worth 22 marks and 1 European and World essay worth 22 marks. You cannot do 2 British essays. You have to pick 1 from each section. If you do pick 2 British essays, the maximum marks you will get is for 1 essay, and it could be up to 22, but just make sure that you do 1 British essay and 1 European and World essay. For the Scottish History paper, which is also known as Paper 2, that is also on Friday the 20th of May 2020, and it's slightly later, it's on at 11 till 12:30. It lasts also 1 hour and a half and is worth 36 marks. If you look at the green box, you'll see the mark breakdown. So there are 4 questions in this assessment. An explain, which is worth 8 marks, and that's just really knowledge. An evaluate, which is 8 marks, which is a source-based question, which needs some recall and some evaluation of sort of the author, the origin, etc. And the Householy, which is worth 10 marks, and the 2 source, which is also worth 10 marks. So during this sort of video, you will see some examples of topics from common topics that most schools in Forth Valley do. So every school will complete a British section, a European World section and a Scottish section. Now the most common British sections are the Atlantic slave trades, Britain 1851 to 1951, Britain and Ireland 1900 to 1985. You must make sure you know which topic that you are doing. European and World, now most schools do 1 topic, but some schools do a sort of mix and match approach. You'll need to make sure you know exactly what your school is doing. So Part D, Germany, 1815 to 1939. Part F, Russia, 1881 to 1921. Part G, USA, 1918 to 1968. Part I, the Cold War, 1945 to 1989. Now the Scottish section, lots of schools do different ones here. So lots of schools do the Wars of Independence, lots do the Treaty of Union, Migration and Empire, and the impact of the Great War. Now, you do need to make sure you know the topics that you're doing. Some pupils have gone in and answered completely different topics. So just make sure that you know which one you are doing. So we're going to focus first of all on the British, European and World paper. So this is the essay paper. So there's a few things that you need to be clear on, okay? So in the SQA study guide, it stated 4 of the 6 issues will be sampled instead of the usual 3. Now that might not make sense to any of you, so if you have a look at this section here, you can see Part D, Germany, and you see it split up into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 topics. Now, in a usual year, we maybe might teach between 5 and 6 of these topics, and you would be asked 3 questions in the exam, and you would pick one of them. Instead, this year, they're adding an extra question, so they're actually asking you 4 issues. So this is giving you more choice. It also means that your teachers perhaps haven't taught you all of these topics. Now, some schools, teachers have taught maybe 3 topics, or some schools maybe have 4 or 5. It just depends on how much was able to fit in at the time. So every topic, so I've given you an example of Germany here, but every topic from Britain, from Crusades, etc., is split into 6. And you will get 4 of these questions will be asked 4 of these different types of essays. I'll show you a bit more about that in the next slide. So this is how your exam is going to look, okay? So you're going to have 4 options per section, okay? So you should choose 1 essay from the British section and 1 essay from the European and World section to write about. Now this person here has went for the women essay. So the part played by women in the war effort was the main reason why some women received the vote in 1918. How valid is this view? And they then went for the Vietnam essay. International isolation of the United States was a key reason why America lost the war in Vietnam. How valid is this view? It's really important that you read the question and also make sure, like we said again, you do 1 British essay and 1 European and World essay. So here are some top tips for the essays, okay? So before you go into the essay paper exam, make sure you know what essay you would pick if all the essays you were taught came up. Now, you might think this is a really random thing to do, but there have been pupils who have learned all the different essays, have went into the exam, saw the Labour essay, written a relatively good Labour essay, then realised halfway through that they could probably have written a far better women essay. Okay, you don't want that to happen to you in the exam. You want to make sure you write your best possible essay. So the best thing to do is to rate your confidence with each essay. This means you won't spend time panicking about which essay to do or actually wasting time doing an essay and then realising you can only do 1 paragraph or 2 paragraphs of it. So you can see some examples to the side here. So the green table, some pupils might do this. So they might sort of rank it most to least confident. And that's, in this case, this pupil has learned 4 essays. Some schools this year are only doing 3 essays, and that's totally fine, per British section or per World section. This other pupil, you can see they've sort of done it in little sort of fake post-it notes. So they've ranked it Labour, Women, Impact of, Reasons for Liberals, and they know basically that the light green one is the best one, and if that comes up, that's the one they're doing. The other one, you can see obviously a German sort of essay section that they've tried to rank as well. Now, I don't know if you can see the pie charts, or you can see the pie charts. They're actually coloured in, so it's sometimes a good idea to actually colour in the sort of rank, if you like, the factors that you know best. So you can see here, some of these pupils really need to focus in on a lot of their factors. The women essay's obviously been done really well by this pupil because they've got 3 green sections, an orange and a red section. So you could also rank your factors and think, right, so what factor do I know best? What ones should I write about? What ones do I not know best? What ones should I focus in on a bit more? So for example, if you can see the pie charts over here, you can see that in the women essay, the pupil knows about the other countries and the suffragettes, but isn't so sure about World War I. They're actually struggling with that. So that would be a way to focus your revision. So it's good to think about different ways that you can do this to think how best to plan and to study for your essays. So some more top tips. Now this might seem like a bit of a silly top tip, but it's really, really important to read the question carefully. So for example, a pupil may quickly scan the exam and see the words civil rights. They may then begin to write an evaluation of the obstacles to the achievement of civil rights for Black people up to 1941, rather than an evaluation of the reasons for the development of the civil rights campaign after 1945. This is an easy mistake to make for many pupils. Now, a lot of pupils do this. Now, there are 2 Liberals essays, and sometimes pupils come out of the exam and they've done the wrong one. There's also a few different German nationalism ones, and there's a few different essays that sort of sometimes, if you're panicking, if you're reading really fast, you might mistake it for the one that you've learned and it's not that essay. So it's really, really important to read the full question and don't just see the words civil rights or liberals and write the essay that you know. So this is the breakdown of the marks. Now you can see this green table here, it's split into 3 different columns. So you've got introduction worth 3 marks, and if your teacher is marking your essays, you might see these codes down the side of it. So SQA markers use codes when marking, and it just makes it easier to check that the standard is being met. So B is for background, F is for factors, and L is for line of argument. Knowledge is worth 6 marks, and that's K. So you might see lots of different Ks written all over your essay. You may even have 10 or 12 Ks, but the maximum mark you can get is 6. Analysis plus is worth 6 marks. So that often can be written in your essays as A or A+, and it's really important to know the difference. So an easy way that we teach our pupils is analysis is this is important, and analysis plus is this is less important. Now, lots of schools do this slightly differently, so don't worry if this isn't the way that you're taught. Evaluation, up to 4 marks, and you will often see E, and you might see numbers written beside the E, so it might say E1, E2, E3, E4, and that's again just a code to let us know why you're being given that evaluation mark. In conclusions, often you'll see J's written beside the conclusions, and that's again just to let us see where we're giving you the marks. One of the top tips that we try and get our pupils to use is to try and mark it themselves before they hand it in. And this is a really good way for them to actually think if they deserve the mark or not, and might be a good top tip for you to do. So introductions, this information is actually came from the SQA Study Guide 2022 and has been slightly adapted across some ways. So in the introduction, you can use your own line of argument and you do not have to agree with the question. If you choose to answer an isolated factor question by selecting another factor, you must still address the fact in the question. Now, there will be some examples on the next page, but I just want to go over what an isolated factor sort of question is. So there's 2 different types of essay in the history exam. One will ask you about a specific factor, so it might ask you about the importance of the suffragettes and women getting the vote. So that's a sort of isolated factor essay. Or you can get a sort of effectiveness essay, which is how effective were the labour reforms. So they have slightly different line of arguments and slightly different analysis, but it's something your teacher will have taught you already. So introductions. If a question asked about the importance of the suffragettes as the reason why some women were given the vote in 1918, you could write, the suffragettes may not have been the most important reason why some women were given the vote in 1918. This essay will argue it was in fact the suffragists. So that is an acceptable line of argument. It's also okay to agree with the line of argument, with the question. So if the question asks about the importance of the suffragettes and you think that the suffragettes were the most important, it's completely fine to agree with that and state that you agree with this so that it is in fact the most important reason. If a question asks about the effectiveness of the labour reforms, for example, you should address the issue whether the reforms were effective or not effective in the line of argument. So you can say the labour reforms were effective in tackling poverty and creating a welfare state. You cannot turn it round and try to make it an isolated factor essay and say something like the most important factor was disease. That won't get you the mark because that's not what the question is asking you to do. Again, your teachers will have given you lots of information about your essays and how to structure them and how to create a line of argument analysis for such an event. Now, this is a example or sort of an essay breakdown for introductions. So your background, you'll see that as a B, and that's worth 1 mark. Now, you need to have 2 clear points of historical background. There's an example to the side that is for the end of the Cold War essay, which is the Cold War sort of section of the European world. So this says, capitalist America and the communist USSR had worked together to defeat the Nazis in World War II. But after this, the relationship deteriorated rapidly, leading to a Cold War between the countries and their allies. So that's a good sort of historical background point. After decades of tension, war in Korea and Vietnam, attempted peace talks and détente, the Cold War between the USA and USSR finally ended in 1991. Another good, detailed background point. So the factors, this is really straightforward, really easy. You can literally just write a sentence listing the factors. So it says, there were many reasons for this, such as the rule of Ronald Reagan, the collapse of communism in the East, Soviet failure in Afghanistan, and economic differences between the East and West. Relatively straightforward, factors are worth 1 mark. Then you've got the line of argument, which is 1 mark, and you'll often see it written as L. So here's a line of argument example. It says, this essay will argue that although Gorbachev played a key role, the most important factor was economic differences between the East and West. And that would get you 3 out of 3 and is a really straightforward example of an introduction. So after you finish your introduction, you'll want to begin writing your paragraph. Now, this information comes from the SQA study guide, and it's sort of explaining what you should do to write a good paragraph. So your paragraph should have a good, clear structure. It's a good idea to identify the factor in the paragraph. For example, the suffragettes were the most important reason why some women were given the vote in 1918. You could then follow this up with 2 or 3 relevant developed points of knowledge. For example, a development point of knowledge might be Emmeline Pankhurst formed the Women's Social and Political Union in 1903, adopting the motto "Deeds not words," suggesting the suffragettes were determined to take action to gain publicity. So that's a nice way to sort of begin your knowledge paragraph. You can then move on to analysis. So when using analysis in an evaluation question, you could first analyse the importance of the factor. For example, this tells us the suffragette campaign helped women gain the vote because, or my pupils tend to do it like this. So this was important, helping women get the vote because. You then, for A+, do a counter argument. So for example, however, the suffragettes failed because, or the suffragettes were less important because. Your analysis should address the factor and sort of link back in terms of the question. In an assessment essay question, you should analyse whether it was effective or not effective, successful or not successful. For example, arguably this made the Labour reforms effective in meeting the needs of the British people as it meant. This makes Labour reforms less effective meeting the needs because. We still sort of get our pupils to say this was important, this was less important, but again, it's whatever your teachers taught you, however you know how to organise this essay. So evaluation. You can use evaluative comments to build a line of argument that recognises the issue, supported by new evidence, a historical interpretation, or something else, so on. There's other different ways to get it. This is often not actually taught by teachers until candidates have attempted a few essays, as it's seen as a bit more complex than the knowledge and analysis skills. I actually often recommend my pupils leave several lines at the end of each paragraph and come back to the evaluation at the end if they have time, because it's better to finish the essay and get on to the second essay than try to get your evaluation marks. You can still actually get an A in this essay paper without doing any evaluation, but if you've got time, if you know it, then definitely have a go at it. So an example of evaluation was included in the SQA study guide, and it states, women's war work was the most important reason for some women gaining the vote in 1918. As historians argue, there was a short-term impact on men and women, breaking down many of the stereotypical barriers, showing that women could work just as well as men, proving that they were equal to men and worthy of the vote by 1918. Now, evaluation is not simply agreeing or disagreeing or stating strengths and weaknesses. You need to make a judgment in response to the question and give a clear reason for your judgment. My pupils tend to find that adding in new information or adding historians is a much easier way of sort of organising their thoughts and getting evaluation. But again, use the information that your teachers have given you and try to follow their advice. Now, this again is a sort of essay breakdown paragraphs. So, start with an introductory sentence. So you could start off with one key factor which led to knowledge. Now you can get up to 6 marks for knowledge. A key factor related to the question, anything will do that is historically accurate. Analysis, up to 3 marks. This was important because. Analysis A+, however, this was less important because. In evaluation, you can get up to 4 marks overall to evaluate. So this is sort of an easy structure, and we often get our pupils to start with this structure and sort of fill in the blanks basically, and that sort of gets them rolling. But it's good just to sort of have this structure in your head when going forward. So conclusion. Do not miss out a conclusion. It is an easy set of marks. Even if you can just jot down something quickly, you might get 1 mark. So conclusion is very important, and your line of argument should make a relative judgment between the different factors supported by evidence or analysis used in the essay. So here's an example. Women's war work was the most important reason in women gaining greater political equality as the country showed its gratitude for a war won. The suffragettes in their militant campaign did gain publicity at the time, but war work was far more important as the militant campaign eventually led to public disapproval. However, most people in Britain approved of the war work done by women. So you cannot simply summarise. Try to provide a relative judgment between the different factors, showing which factor is the most important in answering the historical issue. And it doesn't have to be the factor in the question. It can be the factor that you've put in your line of argument, or it should be the factor that you put in your line of argument in the introduction. So conclusions, here's a wee sort of guide again to show you how conclusions are done. So no marks if you've literally just repeated some stuff and made no judgment. 1 mark, you've made a summary of points made. 2 marks, you've made an overall judgment between the different factors in relation to the issue. And 3 marks, a relative overall judgment between the different factors in relation to the issue, and explain how this arises from your evaluation of the presented evidence. Now that all might seem just like kind of complicated, but it is just dead straightforward, okay? So 1 mark, summary basically. 2 marks, making sure you've got some judgments involved there. The first mark also should have a judgment. It's dead easy to do a judgment. You're literally just picking this was the most important reason. We're now going to move on to the Scottish paper. This is worth slightly less marks. This is worth 36 marks, but it's still equally important. An issue that I often have with my pupils is that they focus so much on the essays that they often forget the sources and focus on, they end up having to focus on this quite a lot near the exam because they've just not got it as much as the essay content. So here's some top tips. Use your time wisely. So 10 mark questions should take just under 25 minutes to answer. 8 mark questions should take just under 20 minutes to answer. If you can get that down slightly, you will have more time at the end to go over and check your answers, which is always something we really recommend. Do not leave the exam early. So the second sort of top tip is ensure your recall examples are Scottish. Now, this doesn't actually apply to some of the topics because they're naturally Scottish. So if you're doing Treaty of Union or the Wars of Independence, most of their content is naturally Scottish, but the Migration Empire and Great War topic, it's difficult sometimes. Sometimes there can be British examples put in, and you have to make it really clear what's a Scottish example. So in my school, for example, we often use points related to the local area. So, for example, the source admits that commemoration occurred in schools and universities across the country who raised funds to memorialise their dead. For example, McLaren High School has a war memorial with 30 pupils and teachers on it. It's actually really interesting to find out about local history because that can be a really good key point for you to remember, to know, and they're quite easy to find out about. So, in the study guide that was released at the start of this week, March the 7th, 2022, it said a few things that I feel maybe could be explained slightly more. So one of the points it says is all 4 issues will be examined in the Scottish paper. Now this is just to explain what those 4 issues here. I've taken a screenshot of Migration Empire. So you can see here down the side that there are 4 key issues and then there's further descriptions of content. So the how fully and the explain questions will come from the key issue and the higher course specifications. So you can see this here. So that means you could get a how fully on the migration of Scots, the experience of immigrants in Scotland, the impact of Scots immigration on the empire, or the effects of migration and empire on Scotland. So that means you can talk about anything in those full topics. So they're really good, those questions, because they allow you to talk about lots of different facts. They're really broad. Now the to source question and the evaluate this question will come from the description of content, okay, which you can see this darker green arrow going to. So it says, basically, these are sort of further broken down. And these are more in-depth points. So you would need to know, for example, maybe about a specific country, a specific, for example, over here you can see issues of identity and assimilation. You might only be asked to talk about Canada in relation to an answer or Australia in relation to an answer. So it's really important that you can do sort of key recall points for each of these. Now, what I would recommend you do is for the to source and evaluate, the maximum recall point you can get for them is 6. However, don't just learn 6 points per bullet point, if that makes sense, because the issue is some of the points that you've learned could actually come up in a source. So if you were doing, for example, the World War I topic, and you learned about the rent strikes and like 2 other facts, but the rent strikes might actually come up as a source question, and then you don't actually have as much recall as you initially thought you had. So it's really important to make sure that you have enough recall in your head when answering these questions. So I would always recommend my pupils to have about 8 recall points in their head for each bullet point or for each section, and that will really make sure that you can answer the question to the best of your ability. So I actually made these maybe 2 or 3 years ago, these posters for my class. Basically, the large circle is the how, fill and explain, the larger circles, and the small circles are the to, source and evaluate. So this really helped my pupils sort of focus in their studying to make sure they knew, right, okay, what do I know about voluntary recruitment? Can I have like 6 to 8 points about that just in case? Or do I have lots of points on Scots on the Western Front? So it's a good sort of revision guide. I'm going to put a wee link to these on the website, so that should help you if you are doing a different topic, migration, empire, treaty of union, etc. So we're going to talk about the sources now, and we're going to look at the to source question, which is worth 10 marks. Now I've got a wee grid to the side here, which basically shows you the breakdown. Okay, so this question actually changed from the last exam. And be very careful because this question is actually fairly new. So if you look at older past papers, you'll see maybe ones from like 2015 that say like source comparison, which is like a bit like National 5. That's not how we structure these questions. That's not what these questions are like anymore. So instead, we're looking at interpretations, which is up to 4 marks, and you get 2 marks per source. Overall interpretations, which is 2 marks, and recall, which is up to 6 marks. So information from the SQA Study Guide 2022. The how much do sources A and B reveal about differing interpretations question uses 2 sources showing differing interpretations of an issue or an event. Now there's some examples on the next slide. They're related to the Wars of Independence. You might not do this, but it's just useful to see the structure and how it's laid out. So overall interpretations is worth 2 marks. I actually get my pupils to do this after they've done the sort of interpretations marks, but whatever you do in your school, you follow that advice. So the to source question basically has 3 different steps. So identifying the overall interpretation in each source. So for example, sources A and B have different views about the role of Edward I and the Great Cause. The overall viewpoint of source A states that King Edward was trying to take control of Scotland and make it part of his kingdom. On the other hand, source B states that Edward I was trying to do what was right to find the next king of Scotland. So that's fairly straightforward. It's not really repeating much from the source or anything like that. It's just basically interpreting the source and what the source is all about. You could, for example, in the Great War section, maybe get one about Dora, and it might be source A's overall viewpoint is that Dora was actually a nuisance to the public and the rules actually weren't that useful. Source B, on the other hand, suggests that the rules were really useful and were actually saving people's lives. So it was the laws or acts were good. So we're just looking at interpretations. Now, this section here, the second section, is selecting up to 2 relevant points from each source and why those points are important. So for example, you could say source A says, but once stated there was almost an immediate adjournment for 10 months. What this did was to leave Edward firmly in charge of the Scottish realm. This tells us that Edward was now in control of Scotland and he could take his time in deciding the next king. So you can see you're sort of quoting and then interpreting that quote, which is basically what we usually do in higher history. And you can get 2 marks from source A and 2 marks from source B. You then do recall, which is up to 6 marks. So introduce and recall knowledge to develop the source points and or contextualise the content of the source. You should link developed recall to the question. So for example, however, there are significant omissions on the role of Edward I in the Great Cause. Edward's final decision, based on the law of primogeniture, was made in favour of Balliol, who became king in November 1292. Now, this is up to 6 marks, but what you could do is you could do your 2 overalls, your 4 recall, your 4 interpretations, and then you only need 4 recall to get 10 marks. So there's lots of different ways you can get up to 10 marks. It's whatever you feel is easier for you, or you might want to do all the different ways just to sort of have an insurance policy. So the next question is the explain question. Again, this was added quite recently, but you'll have done this question or ones like it in National 5. So this comes from the SQA Study Guide. They explain the reasons why a question requires you to identify a key point from a historical issue and provide a relevant explanation in answer to the question. There will be no source. Do not just give a fact. You need to identify a key point from a historical issue and provide a relevant explanation linked to the question. So dead straightforward, it's worth 8 marks. It's on a full topic, so again, it is relatively straightforward. So the following example relates to the Migration Empire topic. So it says, for the question, explain the reasons for the migration of Scots, a relevant explanation might be, many Scots were attracted by the promise of cheap land overseas. They were encouraged to emigrate by the promise of becoming landowners, or in some cases by the offer of free land in countries such as Canada. Each accurate, relevant reason is worth 1 mark. There is no additional marks for a developed point. So you can't just do 4 really detailed points and expect to get 8 marks. You need 8 separate points. Now, almost every school in Scotland knows this, but it's just to be really clear, you need 8 key separate points. The next question is the Householy, which is worth 10 marks. So 4 marks, up to 4 marks for content and up to 7 marks for recall, which adds up to 11. But again, there's different ways you can get this, and it's whatever you feel most confident in. If you think, for example, you're not that good at sources but can remember lots, you can easily just do 3 and then 7 recall and get 10. Or if you're better at sources, you can do 4 source points and then 6 recall and get your 10 that way. So when you're asked how fully does source X explain, remember the question requires a judgment. For example, source X partly explains or explains to an extent. You can include your judgment at any point. This is really important though, okay? You have to remember this. You will only gain a maximum of 2 marks in this question if you do not make a judgment, okay? So you need to be really clear about saying that it partly explains, fully explains, explains to an extent. So if we're looking at the source content, which is up to 4 marks, it's good practice to quote from the source, although you can paraphrase a source point. Be careful when paraphrasing, as it may lead to you misinterpreting the source point. You should support your selected source point with a detailed explanation that you link to the question. So there'll be an example in the next slide. So the following example for this question relates to the topic of the Wars of Independence. And the question is, how fully does source C explain the role of William Wallace and the Scottish resistance? Source C tells us an English force under the Earl of Surrey and Treasurer Cressingham was defeated by the combined troops of Andrew Murray and William Wallace. This was important for the Scottish resistance against English, as the Battle of Stirling Bridge showed that the Scots could defeat a superior English army. So you're taking a point from the source and then you're saying why that source was useful. So you're saying source A states, this shows this was important, something along those lines. So recall, you can get up to 7 marks for recall. This is a gift for most people because it's a full topic, so they can at least think about at least 7 marks from that. So you should also introduce recall knowledge to develop the source points and or contextualise the content of the source. You should link developed recall to the question. However, source C has significant omissions on the role of Wallace and Scottish resistance. The source fails to mention that Wallace trained his troops in Selkirk Forest. This meant he could train the army in secret and wait for the right time to strike against the English using guerrilla tactics. So, given a point of knowledge related to the question. The next question we have is often the one that's most difficult for pupils. It's the one that's often not done that well. So when you're asked, evaluate the usefulness of source A as evidence of, you can comment on different aspects of the source. You can also take from the source and tell us what's missing. So in the green box, you can see sort of the breakdown of the marks. So author, date, type and purpose can get you up to 4 marks. Now the issue is that when people do these or this section, they often do it really basically and they just don't get enough marks. But we'll go into that in a wee bit more detail in a minute or two. The source content, exactly the same as you've done it previously, and you get up to 2 marks for that. An omission, up to 3 marks for things the source doesn't say. Now we're going to go into this in a bit more detail, but this is definitely one that most people probably could work on. So the author, date, type and purpose, up to 4 marks. This is really important. Do not give responses to both the origin and generic responses. So that could be something like, the date is useful because it happened in 1915, or it happened during the war. That's far too basic. You need to be more specific. So you should link the author, type of source, purpose and time into the question with reference to the Scottish issue studied. It has to be more detailed, more clear. So there's an example here. And this question relates to the impact of the Great War 1914 to 1928, and the question, evaluate the usefulness of source A as evidence of the changing role of women in Scotland during the war. So an evaluative comment on the author might be, source A was written by a journalist who witnessed the actions of the rent strike protesters and would be well informed about the events in Glasgow. For timing, a positive comment might be, Source A is a contemporary account of people and events in Glasgow towards the end of the rent strike period in 1915. So you can see that it's clearly linking to the question, that it's really straightforward. It's not saying Source A is a primary source from the First World War. That's far too basic, and it is important to make sure you're linking to it. Sometimes the author might even be someone that you have heard of, okay? So it might be a familiar figure. It might be like Piper Laidlaw or a specific Scottish soldier from a specific battalion. It might be someone like some Mary Barber if you've done the Scottish War topic. So it's really useful to really read carefully the author, really think about the date. Why is that date important? Most of the topics in the Scottish section, there are some key dates that are quite important to learn about, to know about. So again, it's important that you know and understand why certain dates might be important. So omission, that's up to 3 marks. You should also introduce recall knowledge to develop the source points and or contextualise the content of the source. You should link your recall to the question. So an omission point might be, however, Source A omits key points about how the war impacted women in Scotland. After the rent strikes, Helen Crawford and Mary Barber organised a peace conference which gave birth to the Women's Peace Crusade in Glasgow, showing that more women were becoming politically active. So you can see that's clearly a Scottish point. It's also linking to the question, and it's relatively straightforward and detailed. Now, our pupils write the source omits because that saves them a lot of time saying the source fails to mention. And it's only a few seconds, but it does reduce the time they're writing for. So that's us coming to the end of it. There's lots of really useful videos, other supports out there. This was sort of utilising the SQA study guide and sort of trying to help you think about the exam and what you can do to sort of help yourself. So there's other helpful revision support sort of QR codes here. So BBC Bite-sized Higher History is good for some content. There's some videos on there that might be useful. There's also ways you can test yourself. SQA past papers, again, are really useful. Practice really does make perfect, so keep going over them. Even if a top tip might be, see if it's an evaluative usefulness question. Imagine it's a Householy and try to do it as Householy as well, because it's going to be slightly different. In case you've sort of covered all the past papers already. Forth Valley and West Lothian RIC also have lots of exam support videos for history. There's lots of information out there for history, lots of different places that you can find support and help from. Your teacher as well is an enormous resource, so it's really important that if you're struggling or worried or want to find out more about something, that you ask your teacher. Often they'll have lots of resources on their Teams or on their Google accounts, Google Classroom we have lots of things like that. Your teacher might also have Google Sites, so we have a Google site for our pupils. That means they can access stuff really easily. So it's important that you know what support your school's providing for you as well as the Regional Improvement Collaborative. So finally, good luck. There's lots of support out there. There are lots of different ways that you guys can study and focus on this. But just make sure you believe in yourself. Higher history is designed to ensure that you get the best out of the exam, to make sure that you sort of show your talents, your understanding, your knowledge. And it's just about practice. Make sure you're doing lots of practice questions. Make sure you really know and understand the structure of the essays. You know and understand the structure of the source questions. So good luck again. Thanks for listening.